In this clip, we'll take a look at inverted chords. When you invert a chord, it means that you rearrange the notes within the chord. We do this for different reasons, but I will mention two of them. First of all, you don't have to move around so much when you play chords and move from one chord to another. The other reason is that it will actually sound better when you're moving along a sequence of chords. And the one thing to keep in mind when you do inversions of chords is that as long as a chord includes the same notes, it will be the same chord. So it doesn't matter where on the piano you play it, it will stay the same. I will illustrate with some examples here, and the first one we'll start with is a G chord. So on the keys here you can see the notes, the G, the B, and the D. So it makes a G major. And you can move any of these notes to anywhere and it will still remain a G chord as long as you move it to another note with the same name. So for example, I can take this D and move it to another place where you have a D and only play those three notes and it still remains a G chord. So it doesn't change to a different chord name. It's still a G, but it's inverted. We'll take a look at one more example, and in this case we will have a look at an F chord, an F major, and we are able to move the notes around just as on the previous chord, as long as they stay the same note names within the chord. So I can take the F, for example, and move it up here, and it's still an F chord. I have the same notes included, it's just that I've moved them around a bit. I can take the A and move it up here, and it still remains the same chord. It's just inverted, so it's in different positions. So I can take any note within the chord and move it to a place where I have the same note name and it remains the same chord. Inversion of chords becomes especially important when you're moving through a sequence of chords, through a chord progression. It will move around a lot less when you move from one chord to another, and it will sound better. And we'll illustrate that with an example here. We have the little chord change here, which moves from A minor to E major. And we will show how these notes are lined up and how we can invert them to make it sound better and move less. We'll start with A minor notes. So for an A minor we have the A, C, and E, and that's illustrated by red dots here. And to be able to compare that with the E major chord, we'll line up those notes as well, but we'll use blue dots for that so we can tell them apart. So we've got the E, the G sharp, and the B. So that's the notes for the two chords so that we can see them at the same time. We'll now try and invert one of these chords so they end up as close as possible to each other. The A minor is what we start with, and we're moving to the E major. So the red dots that are the notes of the A minor, we'll keep them where they are because that's what we started with. So we'll move the E major so we get as close as possible to the A minor. And a good start is to take a look at the notes that are furthest out to the left and to the right, because those are the ones that are furthest away from where the chord is centered. And we can see that as both on the left and on the right, the keys that are furthest away are E. So we have two E's here, and that's within those, that's where the spread of these chords are. And since we're moving the E major around, then it would be the E note that's furthest to the left. That's the one that we would start to try to center it a bit more. So we'll take that E and move it to another E, and as you can see, here's already a note that's part of the A minor, so that's very natural to keep it on the same key then. So if we already have a finger on a key and that note is included in the next chord, it's natural to keep it and instead invert the chord. If we take a look at this now, it's very centered around the same keys, and it's very gathered. It's not as spread out. And as a matter of fact, by just doing that inversion, we already have the chords as close as they get to each other. So we couldn't invert anymore in order to make them closer. So the chords are already as close to each other as they get. We will now look at a chord progression of 4 chords and see how moving through the sequence of chords will look with inverting the chords compared to non-inverted chords. So non-inverted is when we just play them with root first and then build the chord from there, which will be a lot more jumpy. Moving around between the chords will be moving further on the keys. So this will really illustrate the benefit of inverting chords. So the chords that we have are F, A minor, D minor, and B flat major. And what we'll do is that we'll first have a look at what they look like and just throw out all the notes and see how they compare with the non-inverted chords and the inverted, and then we'll go through it a bit more in detail. So the F major is what it looks like this. Moving on to the A minor, so we see already it's starting to spread. The D minor, it's even a further bigger spread, and with the B flat major, it's spread out across a lot of keys. And here we can see exactly how your fingers would have been moving around on the keyboard when playing the sequence of chords. And it's very clear by this that the inverted version is a lot less moving around, and it would of course be easier to play it. And as a matter of fact, if you look at it, a lot of the chords are on the same keys. So actually, if you look at this chord sequence, it's a whole lot of different chords, but looking at where your fingers would have moved if you invert the chords, it's not moving, well, hardly at all. It stays very much on the same keys. But if you look at the top with the non-inverted, it's a lot more moving around. And we'll now examine this chord by chord, and you'll see even more that it's very jumpy moving through the chords if you're not inverting them. So let's take a look at that chord progression again and do the same thing with looking at non-inverted chords and inverted, but this time one chord change at a time. So we started out with the F major, and we put them in the same place obviously because we haven't been moving anywhere, so we haven't inverted any chords yet. Moving to the A minor would look like this. At the top you will see with the root first and then just building with the rest of the keys. But at the bottom with the inverted ones, you'll see that the difference between an F major and an A minor is minimal. It's one key that you move a finger from the F to the E, and the other two you keep in the same place. So that's the small tiny little difference between an F major and an A minor. And obviously when you play it, it's more natural to do it with the inverted chords. So already very slight little move from A minor, from F major to A minor. Moving on from the A minor, so here is where we are now, if we would play this, and moving from the A minor to the D minor, this is how it would look with the inverted and the non-inverted. And looking at the top with the non-inverted, this is a very big leap from the A minor to D minor if we start with the root and just keep it in that first position. However, if we invert it, looking at the bottom line of keys, we can see that it's one key that we have in common. The A is in both chords. The rest are different, but it's not that much you have to move still. It's just from one key to the next. So the move is still not very big. And this is where we are now. If we would have just a D minor and we have the inverted and non-inverted, and we're doing the last chord now, the B flat, and from D minor to B flat, this is what it would look like. So here it's more clear than ever, I think, in this example, that the non-inverted is a very, very far move to go if we would keep going with the chords as we did, while the inverted one has hardly any move at all. It's just one key. We're just moving the A note to the B flat, and all of a sudden we have the next chord. So it's a very, very big difference in these two ways of playing it. And then, of course, from the B flat major back to the start, because often you start over and do a chord progression a couple of times in most music, and then we would maybe move back from the B flat major to the starting chord, the F, and this is what that move would look like then. And in every single of these chords and these chord changes, because that's where it makes a difference when we're changing from one chord to another. In every single one of them, it's really, really clear how the benefit of inverting the chords is of big importance. And as long the only rule to remember, as long as you keep the same notes with the same note names in the chord, it will stay the same chord, and then you can move around them pretty much as you want, and it will still remain the same chord. But when moving for a chord sequence, usually you would try and aim to get them to as close to each other as possible with a minimal move.